Hello. You all right? Thank you very much for inviting me to speak at this event. Lots of interesting projects and people so far, and I'm sure that will continue across the weekend. So I'm going to talk quite quickly about public art in England. I'm specifically talking about public art in England because we have a speaker tomorrow who's going to talk a little bit about public art in Scotland. So we're going very, very national on this today. It's going to be a very national experience. I'm going to quickly talk about IXIA because I think I need to get into the meat of the presentation because I think we're running behind a little bit. So I need to do that. Whoop. I'm not going to be doing anything in a minute. It's frozen. What? Hello, can I have some help? Somebody up there. It's not clicking through.
Here.
Oh, he's joking.
Okay.
Sorry. It's a warning for the future speakers there about which buttons to press. Anyway, moving on. So I'm going to talk quickly about IXIA, and then I'm going to talk about the very specific relationship that exists between public art and regeneration in England. And it's a relationship that's been around since the 1940s, 1950s, and it's where most of the money for public art commissioning comes from in England and in the UK. I'm going to talk about some of the agencies who are involved in providing public art, who does it and why they do it, but also most importantly, I think, and kind of our role as an organisation, as a think tank, is to talk about some of the characteristics and some of the criticisms of public art in England. So there's been a shift in practice over the last 15 years, and I just want to reflect on those shifts so that maybe that will help you think differently about the public art that you might get involved in Portugal. So just the notes, the text is as much for me as it is for you, so I remember what to say. But to quickly say that we're a think tank, we're based in Birmingham in England, we work across England, but we also work in other countries, and our role is to create and distribute new knowledge about public art to a range of organisations and individuals. Those organisations involve the private sector, the public sector, artists, curators and the public. So that's what we do. We don't actually commission public art, we don't manage projects. We're slightly removed from that, and we're funded by the Arts Council of England, which is the national arts development agency, and that organisation wants us to have an independent and objective view about public art in the UK. We're there to be like a critical friend. That's our role as an organisation. I'm just going to skip past that. We have a very small core team, and we have lots of consultants who we bring in to deliver our projects. And our projects are based around 4 key areas: research and publications, that's looking at what artists are doing and why, and also the sources of support and funding, so where the money's coming from and who's going to be supporting public art and artistic practice in the future. We also do lots of training and events where we get the public art sector together to talk about practice, kind of events like this really, and kind of learn new things, experience new artworks, talk to new artists from around the world. We do a lot of promoting, advocacy. We're doing a lot of that now because the kind of money's drying up. So we do a lot of kind of selling the idea of public art to the government, to the Arts Council, to local government, to private sector developers, to curators, artists. We do a lot of the kind of promotion of public art. And a big thing for us is a website called Public Art Online, which is kind of UK specific, but also has an international following, where there's lots of case studies and information about public art commissioning, both in the UK, England, but across the world. Let's start with a definition. And this is from Patricia Phillips. It's quite old, but I think it's one of the best definitions around, really. And it's part of it. It's only the opening sentence, so you can kind of go and find the full version. And as it says, public art excludes no media, materials or process. It can require years of planning, consultation and approval to develop, or it can be spontaneously unsanctioned. It can be temporary or permanent. It can be momentary or lasting. So it's quite a broad definition. But that's all art. What's the difference between, somebody just rocking up and busking in a street and a piece of public art? And I guess for me, it's about public art reflecting the dynamics, a dynamic understanding of place, about understanding the characteristics of places and reflecting that that's a ever-changing and ever-moving kind of situation. We also survey the sector in England every year, find out where the money is and who's doing what. And so in the UK, it's worth about £50 million last year in terms of the value of the public art sector. 11 million of that came from the Olympics. Employs around 1,000 workers, so that's artists, curators, local government officers. So we kind of build a picture of the sector and what it looks like. It's getting smaller, and it's getting smaller because of the cuts in the public sector from the coalition government, but also obviously the economic downturn and the effect that is having on regeneration projects. There's less public sector money going into building stuff, and there's less private sector money going into building stuff as well. Public art happens in three ways. It happens as an extension of public policy at a national and local level. So that's public art, which is a result of health, regeneration, planning, education policies at a national and local level. So commissions come about in that way. There's also a raft of organisations and individuals who produce public art projects. Art Angel being quite a famous one, Liverpool Biennial being another, but it also involves non-arts organisations, community groups, etc., who might commission artists because they want to work with artists. And those organisations, like the Art Angels and Liverpool Biennials, they're also funded by the Arts Council. And they're a big part of the kind of public art picture in England. And finally, of course, there's artists who develop their own projects. So artists who just get out there, want to work in the public realm, and will do that with or without support. Self-organised practice, and that's becoming very, very common. As we've moved from a situation where there was a lot of commissions a few years ago, before the economic downturn and the change of government, to the new situation, a situation of austerity, artists having to learn to kind of develop their own work in their own ways, and deliver that in the public realm. So, public art and regeneration. I think it's based on two beliefs. When it comes to public policy, when it comes to the attitude of local councils or private sector developers, it's based on two key beliefs. The first one is this: that public art can help change the external perception of a place so that businesses want to invest, tourists want to visit, and people want to live there. That it can kind of help make places seem a little more sexy, a bit more interesting, a bit more kind of dynamic. And when cities and towns are competing, they want to have a little bit of an edge. And that kind of position, that belief, produced a whole raft of commissions, some of which you probably, hopefully, you might recognise. This is probably the most famous one in Gateshead, commissioned by Gateshead Council at the end of the 90s, the Angel of the North, commissioned as the first step of the regeneration of the northeast of England, which has become very deindustrialised after mining had gone, after shipbuilding had gone. It was kind of reinventing itself. So this was commissioned with lottery money back in the 90s by Anthony Gormley. Very kind of powerful image, symbol of the northeast now, and that's why it was commissioned, as part of the rebranding of a place. The thing about that commission is it kind of spurned a million other angels of the north, and one of those is this piece by Jean Plenser, which is in St Helens, which is in the northwest of England, which he produced in collaboration with a bunch of ex-miners, and they worked with him on this image of this girl's head, which sits above an abandoned mine shaft in the northwest of England. These are very large scale, very big, very impressive, very spectacular commissions, which look great in the market material for towns and cities, and kind of convey this new image, this new creative image of a place. And there's a number of commissions of these, like these, around the UK. We also had a big push on architects working in collaboration with artists on designing new places. This is a housing estate in Birmingham, where the artists collaborate with the architects on the design of this public space. And this is based on the idea that if you created better quality built environments, people want to use it, people want to feel more included, people want to live there. You have all these kind of benefits. Also, potentially add value to the properties which surround the public space as well. It's another example. This is actually on a tube station on London Underground, wrapper by Jackie Poncelet. We also had the kind of emergence of biennials, big visual arts festivals, and festivals have become very, very popular in England over the last 20 years. And this is a piece from Liverpool Biennial, which was done a few years ago by Richard Wilson, where the circular section of the building rotates. And a more recent piece from a few years ago, Web of Light. Again, a visual arts festival lasting 10 weeks, apparently bringing £27 million into the local economy, apparently attracting 600,000 visitors. This is art in a festival format which is being used to help progress and develop Liverpool economically and potentially socially as well. Big events, spectacular, all look great. The second belief is that public art can help local people shape the development of a place by communicating local identity, encouraging social interaction, reducing social exclusion, and addressing issues of local concern. So this is art which is focused on people and the people who live somewhere. Now this type of idea, this belief, produced a lot of work like this, lots of participatory arts projects where artists were working with people to produce all sorts of stuff. Sometimes this stuff became small interventions, gates for parks, pieces for community buildings. But more recently, in the context of the Olympics, which was obviously last year, there was a large spend on commissions which were supposed to involve as many people as possible in the idea of the Olympics through arts projects. And this is an example where, and in this case, over 1,200 people living in the southeast of England sent in abandoned bits of wood, old tennis rackets, all sorts of items, which were then kind of amazingly turned into the hull of that boat, and that floated around the south coast of England. So this is kind of participation on a mass scale. The people just kind of send stuff, the artist creates into something quite beautiful, and that's kind of it. So this participation was quite simple, quite straightforward. So maybe to reflect on some of the characteristics and criticisms of public art, kind of which evolved around those types of projects that I've just described. Not specifically those projects, but a general, by the mid-2000s, there's so much public art commissioning was being done that there began to be a bit of a backlash from academics and critics who were just wondering what it was all for and what it was actually trying to do. So maybe some of the key ideas which came out of those debates, the first one was that it's commissioned top-down. It's a construction of civic identities and social good. It's an imposition of somebody else's values onto a local place. That somebody else is constructing some new image of a place which has got nothing to do with local aspirations. The works like that, particular stuff aligned to development, supported gentrification. It supported making places more expensive. And as artists, you probably kind of know that story, whereby you live there, you cluster, you create great bars and cafes, good clubs, and eventually people start moving in and you get moved out because you can't afford to live there anymore. It's that kind of story. And also that leads to the degree of displacement. So you get that kind of negative impact of public art being part of that notion of property-led development. There's some great claims made about public art by the arts sector because we're advocates, because we want to do it. We claim about the benefits of art on health, on education, in terms of creating jobs. But actually a lot of those claims aren't proven. They are just claims. There's lots of anecdotal evidence, but there's very little scientific evidence. So evaluation is a huge issue. How do you evaluate the impact of the Angel of North? How do you evaluate the impact of participatory arts projects? It's an ongoing debate in the public arts sector in the UK. A lot of the projects are output and object-based. There's lots of big objects produced. There's sometimes the projects, particularly the participatory arts projects, are more to do with public relations than they are to do with public art. Often they're one-off, they're short-term engagement, and actually there's a very limited degree of involvement between the artist and place. And actually, things like the Angel of North, as I said, have become default. They've become kind of the first thing people think of. I was in a meeting last week in Birmingham where a local organisation involving local businesses want to spend £1 million on a big sculpture for Birmingham. And that's kind of 15 years after the Angel of the North. They want that brand, they want that image. Still, we're having those conversations. So spend a lot of time talking to them about the different ways that you might approach commissioning. But even those critics don't entirely dismiss this relationship between public art and regeneration, because regeneration is the perfect context in which artists should work. It's about people, it's about places, and artists who want to work in the public realm should be interested in people and places. So regeneration provides that context. It's more about the way in which artists engage with these projects. The coalition government brought in the idea of the big society, the idea that people would take responsibility for parks, people would take responsibility for education. They would look after themselves rather than relying on the state to fund stuff. And I guess maybe what they forgot to do is when you say to people, do what you want, sometimes those people won't do what the government wants them to do. You kind of give them permission to disagree with you. You give them power to kind of step away from policies. And I guess that's the important thing, that's the important shift in art, public art in England at the moment, is that emerging practices are about facilitating conversations with people about their environment, and that can be a critical conversation. It'd be a conversation that challenges the status quo, challenges potentially government policy and what other organisations want you to do or want you to be. So I'm going to talk a little bit about one project which isn't in an urban context. It's in the Lake District in the northwest of England, basically a national park full of lakes and mountains. I'm going to talk about an initiative called Grisdale Arts and just talk about the processes they use. Grisdale Arts kind of was established in the 70s as a kind of sculpture in the forest type initiative. But by the 90s, it kind of ran out of steam. So this is an example of an Andy Goldsworthy. It's called Taking a Wall for a Walk. You can just about make out the stone wall. A lot of work like that, a lot of really good land art, environmental art from that period was commissioned. In the late 90s, the current director, Adam Sutherland, took over, and he wanted to take Grisdale Arts outside this forest context. He wanted to talk about the social, economic, cultural, political position of the Lake District as a national park, as a major centre of tourism, selling William Wordsworth, selling kind of its connections to Beatrix Potter, selling all that idealised view of what the Lake District was about. He wanted to kind of reveal a different side to the place. And it's this priority, and what happened, I guess, that the tourism had taken priority over traditional economic activities within the rural environment. So farming and mining had gone, replaced by tourism. And also, Grisdale Arts moved or followed the trajectory of moving from object-based public art, so artworks, to much more dialogical, conversational public art practices, where artists are engaged in a broader conversation with the community and the producer about what they're going to do. In 2009, they opened Lawson Park, which is there. That's their headquarters, overlooking Lake Coniston. And that building includes the offices, a library, an archive, accommodation for artists and the director. And it also has land which is currently being cultivated. And the idea is that they develop cultural activities organised around agricultural production. So the idea it becomes self-sustaining. So while they work is each year, one of the aspects of their programme is each year they award residencies to artists to develop projects in relation to the Lake District. But there's no fixed period for these residencies. They can happen over any amount of years or time. And the focus is on process rather than the production of art objects. It's focused on conversations and research. And they work alongside Grisdale artists, work alongside Grisdale Arts. They also work alongside the community to develop and realise pieces which challenge the artists but also challenge the community. They're kind of in it together. But it's a kind of Grisdale Arts try and establish an equal conversation between the parties. And the work often feeds into local events, local festivals, local traditions. That's where it's showed, that's how it's disseminated. They also undertake other types of projects, and I'm going to show an example now of a project which they did in a market town called Egremont in the northwest of England. So This is a piece by Jeremy Deller and Alan Kane, so maybe you know Jeremy Deller. He's quite a well-known British artist, international artist. Egremont's a market town. Every year it has a festival called the Crab Fair, and that festival's been running for hundreds of years. And up until a few years ago, part of that, they opened that fair with a local tradition which involved putting up a big pole, covering it in lard, and somebody had to climb the pole, and if they got to the top, they won a top hat, or I think they won a leg of lamb. But obviously health and safety, the local council came along and said, health and safety, you're not doing that anymore. You're not going to be climbing up that lardy pole, which you might fall off. And so through conversations facilitated by Grisel Arts and through Jeremy Dell and Alan Kane's kind of interest in folk art, they kind of re-explored this idea and came up with a sculpture which looks a lot like a greasy pole. So what you have now is an artwork which is temporarily installed at the fair. And then you can see somebody on the right climbing it. So they kind of brought back a local tradition through a creative conversation. They found something local and meaningful. They didn't impose some piece of art from somewhere else onto this market town. They engaged in a long conversation with local people and came up with a piece which kind of really hit on a local kind of issue, a local nerve, and meant something to the local population. It's another project that they're currently running with Fernando Garcia Dore, who you might know of as an artist who is very well known for his socially engaged practice. It's called Folk Mobile Dairy School, and it's about making cheese. Farmers in the Lake District used to supplement their sheep farming incomes by selling cheese, and that's a tradition that got lost. So again, they're beginning to kind of reinvigorate, bring this tradition back. And the idea is that they do it very locally, but eventually it's also a tradition in Spain, tradition elsewhere across the world. They create a kind of global phenomena, that you do something very, very local and you find connections elsewhere. You find connections globally. It's another example of a project they're running. And this building is called the Mechanics Institute and was a centre of learning in the 1900s, but fell into disrepair. And Grisel Arts, working with local people, have turned it into, given it a new life. They've created a library which had gone. This is an example of an honest shop where local goods are put out and people go in there, leave some money and take the goods, and it's based on trust. And I guess for me, what sums up their practice is the top line of this quote, which is, this is a new way forward for cultural activity to develop in communities, not just as a spectacle or visitor attraction, but integrated into day-to-day lives in a way that can be useful to residents and visitors alike. What they're trying to do is to be useful to the local people, still connect with dialogues about contemporary art and art world conversation, and also be global. They're operating on all those levels as an organisation, and they're there all the time. And I guess finally, maybe just talk about the characteristics of that practice. Is it is counter-spectacle, and there's many aspects to it. Grisel Arts provide an autonomous space. They find it's called the aesthetic third. The idea that the arts create a kind of independent new space where new conversations can take place. And I guess one of the criticisms, though, is it's not art. It's social work. It's community work, but it's nothing like art. That's one of the debates which kind of surrounds this practice. Where's the art? There's a resistance to doing anything predetermined. Artists are asked to research and think and connect with the Lake District. Grisel Arts support that as producers, support that process. But time and presence. Grisel are immersed in the local community, local society in the Lake District, and the artists become immersed in that too. That very, very strong connection with people, with cultures, with what's going on. And that can only be done when there's a constant presence. So that kind of short-term stuff that I was showing you earlier, the one-off projects, it kind of challenges that practice. You can't deny the impact of charismatic agency, the power of the artist, the power of the producer as an individual to get people involved. And people who work in this way, they need to have some personality about them. They need to be able to draw people in, have conversations, set up boundaries and set up ways of working. Funding this stuff is tricky. Takes many different forms. Have to kind of be quite relaxed about conditions. How do you evaluate it? It's so organic. You have to kind of find ways of evaluation which evolve naturally. And also this idea that at some point they have to hand the art back, they have to hand the project back to local people. And so as artists, they've got to kind of give up some authorship. They've got to give up some control. So my last slide, and then I'm done. I don't know how I've done for time. I've been massively over. Again, started with a quote from Patricia Phillips. Going to end from an essay she did called The Public Art Machine. And she wrote this in the 80s. And at that time, you know, a lot of investment had happened in arts or public art organisations. Policies and strategies were being written into regeneration and planning. It was like a kind of golden era for the public art in the UK and also in America. And there's this like huge mechanism. But what she was beginning to pick out and notice is that that mechanism, that framework, what policies, strategies, organisations, were beginning to kind of mould the art. They were beginning to kind of determine what the art was going to be. You know, the structure became so powerful. The artists weren't really in control of what they were producing anymore. They were still making the stuff, but briefs were restricted. There was these huge expectations about what a work of art could do. And so she's just talking about the idea that, you know, don't let that happen. When you're writing policies or strategies, when you're thinking about commissioning work, you have to kind of help stuff happen rather than prevent stuff happen. And you've got to kind of keep an open space for artists to do what artists do, which is make art. You've got to control that policy framework. You need those policy frameworks to generate the opportunities and the money, but after a while, you've got to kind of let artists be artists. So the management has to come away from them a little bit. That's it.